Jason, are you, see you're in the house. Are you with us?
I am here, Anna.
Awesome. There's Jill. Hey. Jill with her chipper smile and her fabulous dyslexia. And so earlier there's Dennis. Hey.
I had chicken salad chick, but
Ooh,
it's pretty good.
Hey, Eddie. Good to see y'all.
Good to see you as always, Anna.
And my captions are in front of Jeremy's video there. Hey, Jeremy. Oh, 3 ginger snaps. Okay. Well, someone's got a lot of control. That's great. I wish I could.
Oh, just a snack.
Wow. I wish I had that type of self-control. 3 ginger snaps. That's, yeah. And we've got another A. Taylor in the house. I noticed you earlier, but I have to point you out. So are you Anna Taylor also, or are you on mute?
I think it's Angie.
Angie Taylor.
Angie Taylor. Okay. Well, I noticed you earlier and I'm like, wait a minute.
Okay. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Well, good deal. All right. Well, we're
And
about to get, I'm sorry, please.
The A. Taylors are dressed alike.
Oh yeah, the leopard kind of got the leopard print going.
Oh, we are dressed alike. I like your stuff a little better than mine.
Thanks.
It's good to see you guys. And thanks for having your cameras on for a second. Hey, Jason, I see you got your smile on today. It's Sarah and Harris there. Good to see y'all. Clark, thank you. It's good to see your faces. You know, earlier when I was training, I realized something as a presenter. When I couldn't see y'all, it was weird for me. So, you know, it's good to see y'all for just a second in this virtual world. We all kind of learned some stuff, and I learned something about myself today that if I don't see y'all at all, I'm not going to maybe be my best. So hopefully y'all got most of the stuff we talked about earlier, and it's great to see your smiling faces. So with that, we are going to be learning about Microsoft Office today. And I know y'all all have different jobs in different, you know, parts of the state, and you work with different parts of the agencies. And so this is so cool because honestly, we all can learn a lot. I mean, I can't wait to watch Jason's presentation again. And I'm doing this with him, and I watched him last week. But I'm really grateful that we're going to be recording this, which we are recording live, so that you guys can go back and watch some of these awesome things he's going to be teaching. So have fun, enjoy it, and we will be back for some questions and answers. And we will wrap up at 2:30 prompto. So hats off to you, Jason. Take her over.
Thanks, Anna. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jason Martin, the Assistive Technology Specialist for the Blind here at the Alabama Department of Rehabilitation Services. I have a master's in special education, and I'm the state's one and only certified assistive technology instructional specialist. So that's a mouthful to say that I work with blind and visually impaired people to help kind of get the job done. So what we're going to talk about today is a bevy of things centered around Office and Office accessibility. Office is one of the most widely used programs kind of out there. You know, like if you're not using Microsoft Office at a state job, then more than likely you don't have a computer. And that may sound random, but I've totally ran into one employee in my time at the state, and they were here for 13 years and they didn't have a computer. I still don't quite know how to answer that one, but you know, so really this impacts everyone. The things that I'm going to go over today are not only to help you help individuals with disabilities, but it will also help you make better documents, better files, and really have a better sense of how Microsoft Office works and how it will work for your own agency, really. So how to make better documents. So I'm going to go ahead and preempt you guys. I'm going to be bouncing around between Zoom and PowerPoint, and there's some live demonstrations. I'm actually going to show a YouTube video kind of to kick us off as per Miss Anna Taylor's suggestion. And I think it's a great video just to kind of get you in the feel of the reason why we do this. And it's yeah, she hearts it. Thanks, Anna. So it's a little bit longer, but I think the guy has a really great message to hear. So we're going to start with that. as I'm switching around, I'm going to eventually cut my video off. But I wanted to let you all know that I'm an individual with a vision impairment. I always like to be upfront and honest about that. I'm a proud graduate of the Alabama School for the Blind, go Redskins. My father is totally blind, and my son has a visual impairment. My grandparents met at the School for the Blind in the 1940s, right? So if I have kind of a little bit different take on disabilities than maybe you just saw in the previous session, they do a great job of explaining, etiquette and things like that. But with me, you might get just a little bit different perspective. So it comes from anything I say, I assure you, comes from a place of love and not anywhere else. So with that, I'm going to skip around and get to my PowerPoint. I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to take off my beautiful face because I don't want you to see me leaning in and get like this close up on my nose and luxurious beard here. So let me stop my video. Okay. And okay. All right. And as always, Anna, I'm going to check with you to make sure everything's looking good.
Looking good, Jason.
Thank you. So I wanted to start out, and I've probably got this sharing, so it's blocking half the screen. There we go. And I'll lower that to the bottom. Just bear with me. Zoom's a little bit strange, and it's a fickle beast. So what we're going to be talking about today specifically with office accessibility is something called 508 compliance. And on the PowerPoint, I've got this long, lengthy definition that comes from the web of what 508 compliance is. And I just kind of want to break it down. I mean, you can read through the entire slide if you like. I'm very accustomed to presenting to blind and visually impaired individuals. So like it is habit for me to read this, but I'm just going to tell you that 508 is essentially a standard in the Rehabilitation Act that essentially, just putting it to the bread and butter of it, it tells you, or it is the standard of how to make documents and computer equipment essentially accessible to individuals with disabilities. Now, I know I mentioned earlier, several topics about blindness because that is my specialty, but this goes for all disabilities. So one of the reasons why we teach to 508 standards is so that you encompass all disabilities, learning disabilities, dyslexia, reading disabilities, cognitive issues, orthopedic impairments, people that might not have full function of their fingers or limbs, or individuals who might only be able to use a computer through switch access. So individuals that are hard of hearing or deaf. So it encompasses this wide range, but probably what you're going to hear me say over and over again is, well, this is how a person with a visual impairment uses it, because a lot of the things that we'll talk about today greatly affect that population because they use a screen reading program called JAWS, or they use a number of screen reading programs, but one that is very popular is called JAWS. So it essentially reads the screen for them. So what we're doing by looking at Office and what my goal here today to get you to get is how you can take your Word documents, your emails, your PowerPoints, and make them accessible to a broad range and a broad audience. And so 508 mandates that. So if you're a federal agency or you're submitting documentation to a federal agency, you have to abide by these standards because the federal government cannot discriminate against employees with disabilities. So this is that standard that really helps them comply with all of those regulations. A lot of times when I'm working with either disability consumers, people that have disabilities, sometimes what I get, and agencies as well, what I get often is they don't quite understand. They'll get a complaint from a consumer per se, and they'll say, this is inaccessible. And the consumer kind of isn't necessarily the best person to tell you why it's inaccessible. They just know it's broken. And agencies really have a hard time from what I've gathered in the state of where to begin. And so this 508 standard, if you get nothing from me today, where you begin is look at 508 standards. And so that if you meet that, you're meeting essentially all disabilities where they're coming from. And that's what I really like about it. So there's a number of different things that 508 impacts. Information and communication technology, they call it ICT, telephones, televisions, DVD players, internet and intranet websites. So like if you have an internal SharePoint, this stuff affects it too. PDF documents. We have a whole session on Thursdays that goes way in depth about PDF documentation. It's a little tough, but it goes over how you make those accessible. So really what we're focusing on today is average documents that pretty much maybe a large portion of your employees are creating. So why do we do 508? I'm sorry that I've got something probably blocking the screen. All right. Why would we say to comply with 508 standards if you're not a federal agency? You don't have to, and a lot of people know that, so they don't. So anything you submit to the feds must be 508 compliant. So I believe it was for either Labor of Commerce, and I do believe it was Commerce, that you guys had an annual report. It was about 127-page annual report that had to be submitted to the feds and to the federal government. And so if that document was not accessible, they wouldn't accept your annual report. I worked with them for many years on that. And I think over time, they kind of got an idea of what I was doing to make these things accessible or the best practices. But if it's not accessible, they will kick something as important as your annual document or annual report back to you. It integrates best practices for files. So how you name things, how you organize stuff, how you structure your documents. This isn't good for just people with disabilities. This is good for everybody. One thing that you hear all the time is that individuals with disabilities, if they're receiving something and it's not accessible, that it could be grounds for a lawsuit. So it's not necessarily always that case, but you want to put the image of your agency essentially the best foot forward. You want to avoid any bad PR or bad lawsuits. And this is a great way to do it. And it's an easier way to do it. As I said before, when you do it this way, when you follow these standards, it makes documents easier for everybody, not just individuals with blindness, not just people with disabilities, but all people. And you'll kind of see that as we go along. And it creates a best practice for your agency to develop a culture of inclusion for everybody. Not only are you doing the best things for your document, but you're doing the best things for your community and any individual that may have a disability that accesses your files, anything that goes public. As I'm going through this and as I'm making statements or saying something, if you have a question, I needed to start with that, but hey, I was ready to get the ball rolling. If you have a question, please type it in the chat or get somebody's attention, because with Zoom, it's kind of strange. Like I don't get to see you literally, like Anna said earlier, it's me staring into the void of PowerPoint. So if you have a question, I had a question last session that we did this, and it was a very good one. They said, well, where do we need to start first? Do we start with our own documents? Do we start with everything making it accessible? Do we start with stuff that's going out into the public? And I thought that was just an awesome question. And what I would say is that essentially anything you put on your website, you need to go through these practices for. If you have an individual that's working with you that has a significant disability that would require accessible media, definitely you want to make sure that individual is getting what they need. But if you have a place to start, definitely anything that you're putting out public or on the public website is a great place to start. So anything that you're giving to the public essentially should go through this process. Anna last week had this great phrase, and I've heard it before, but she said it and it makes sense, especially after we were through with all of the really technical PDF stuff and web accessibility stuff. It's how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so this accessibility, or this idea of overall accessibility, you're not going to achieve that in a month. You're not going to achieve it probably in a year. but you should be gradually making improvements or gradually eating this accessible elephant. And naturally my PowerPoint has frozen. Okay, let me go. I want to start off or just kick it off, and it's somewhere else in the slide, but I want to kick it off about why this matters. And this is a great talk from an individual who is doing a TED Talk. TED stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And he just really gives a great perspective as to why this affects him. Now, he is a blind guy because I'm partial, right? But take a look. And it is about 19 minutes long, but I think it's about 19 minutes of entertainment. And I cut out some of my more boring regulation stuff to give you this more exciting video. So those of you sitting at your desk watching this know that we're not fluffing it with time. We're actually cutting down some of the more difficult and textbook stuff. All right, I'm going to mute myself. And Anna, give me a thumbs up if you can hear this.
No sound yet, Jason. You got it optimized, right?
Seraphin, I've been blind since birth.
Up there it is.
I was 7 on an Apple IIe. That was the first computer with a screen reader. And that's how a blind person uses a computer. They use a program that reads to them. I got my first PC in 1990 and used MS-DOS all through the 90s. We entered kind of a dark age of accessibility, coincidentally when Windows became dominant. Yeah. And after one particular Windows related freak out, I couldn't take it anymore and I switched to Linux. And now I use a Mac. Yeah, right on. In June of 2010, I got an iPhone, and that changed my universe as soon as it entered into it. The blind are used to getting nothing from companies, and we felt skeptical when Apple first announced that they would include a screen reader called VoiceOver with their iPhone. We were like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. How can a blind person even use a touchscreen? And we all made fun of it. And then a friend of mine actually got one, and she just started going nuts about it and called me and saying how great it is and how it's the next big thing and all this. And I'm like, really? Like, you were just making fun of this like 3 days ago. And she's like, I know. You have to check it out. And I was like, all right, fine. So I went to the AT&T store with my mom, and since I'm a nerd, I actually read the manual the night before. So I had a pretty good idea of what to expect, actually. And as a result, I picked it up and was able to use it right away. I checked the weather. I checked stocks. I could read a stock chart for the first time. And that's the feature that really sold me, because that I could read a stock chart for the first time really showed Apple's detail and the commitment to accessibility. So that really sold me. And once I bought the phone, I was buying the phone, and Mom asked if I could get a text message on it. And the guy at the AT&T store said he didn't think so. Often the people who work for the stores know that the accessibility features exist, but they don't know about the limits and the capabilities. I said, I think it can, based on what I've read and what I've seen so far. And she sent it, and it came right through. It said, hi, Austin, and everyone felt moved, even the guy at the AT&T store. So I got my brand new awesome iPhone home, and I was so excited because now I could finally run apps. Everyone was talking about running apps. No one said what apps. They were just talking about apps. And so I was like, cool, I can finally run apps. And so I was thinking about what apps. And I was thinking about different devices that are made for the blind. And this is a thing that you have to understand. This is why the iPhone is so revolutionary for the blind. There are a whole bunch of devices that are made just for the blind that often cost a lot of money and aren't very well supported. They have loaded down, etc. And so I was thinking about this as I was playing with my iPhone. And for instance, there's a device called a color identifier. It costs $200, and you can point it at an object and it tells you the object's color. So I thought about that, and I typed color identifier into the App Store. An app came right up, Color ID. It cost $2. I downloaded it and installed it, and I was like, oh, this is the coolest thing. The iPhone really is the awesomest thing. I ran it. And it just kept saying black, black, black. And I was like, oh, my heart kind of sunk. I was like, oh, once again, harsh reality has reasserted itself. And but then I thought about it, and I was like, well, wait a minute. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, you already see where this is going. It's pitch black out. I have no lights on. And yeah, I forgot you need light to see color. Right. So I turned on the light and out came the color. And that's when I knew that the iPhone was just totally awesome for the blind. It really would be the next big thing. Oh, an interesting thing, by the way, to note about that app is he didn't even make it for the blind. And that's the advantage to building accessibility into something as Apple did as a core part of the product instead of just an afterthought. It's also much more helpful to think of accessibility in terms of a spectrum, that is, from no accessibility to total accessibility. So after I got into the iPhone, I wanted to start getting into programming the iPhone. And for that, I use a language called Ruby Motion. It's Ruby for iOS and macOS. It's all text-based, so it's totally accessible. And I've been doing some really awesome work in that as well for the accessibility. So you can check that out if you're into that. In January of 2012, I moved into the city, into Philadelphia. Remember, all this started happening in 2010. So in 2012, I moved into the city, and that changed my life forever as well. I lived in Swarthmore for most of my life, and Swarthmore is a beautiful town. Swarthmore is awesome. Swarthmore is very much like the Shire from Middle Earth, from Lord of the Rings. You know, it is. It's very much keep your nose out to trouble, and no trouble will come to you. And you know, change comes slowly, if at all. And that's how it is, and that's awesome. But just like Frodo, one day I had to leave the Shire, and I moved into the city. My condo actually, before it was a condo, was an old school building with crack dealers in it, apparently. And but now it's a beautiful, awesome condo with young professionals, and that's the kind of change that's taking place in the city. In May of that year, of 2012, I began learning a really cool skill called echolocation, and that is basically seeing through sound by making a simple tongue click, like a blind person or anyone can train themselves to actually see through sound instead of seeing through reflected light. You're seeing through reflected sound. The brain simply decodes the reflected echoes from that pulse, like sonar. And this works because the brain is neuroplastic. That is, the brain is capable of forming new pathways, in this case, between the visual inputs and the auditory inputs, rather, and the visual centers. So that really gave me long-range vision for the first time, and it helped me feel much more plugged in and immersed in the world around me. So once I got my feet on the ground, later on in the year, I decided to get into the Philly tech scene. And actually in January of the next year, I checked out Indie Hall. Everyone told me I had to check out this place called Indie Hall, a co-working space on North 3rd Street. It's now known as Nerd Street, officially, by the way. So yeah, very cool. So I went to Indie Hall, and that was another total life-changing thing. Indie Hall has a motto, JFDI. They won't let me say what it stands for here. Just effing do it is basically what it comes down to. And it's not just the motto of Indie Hall, it's really kind of the spirit, I think, of the whole, renovation that's taking place and revitalization. I've talked a lot about accessibility in terms of technology, but anything can be made accessible. It can apply to anything. A few months later, when I was at an Indie Hall event, I met a friend named Sonia, and we began a project called Braille Street Art. We do sticker art, and she prints them, I braille them, we collaborate. It's gone over really well. People really are into it. We actually won the Philly Geek Award for Best Visual Artist, I believe it was. I told them I wasn't actually a visual artist, but they gave us the award anyway. So yeah, it was pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And you might even see some Braille Street Art around, who knows. And another really neat thing I started doing last year was touch tours. I met a woman named Trish Monder, who's also here today, and she heads up the touch tours at Penn, at the university, at the museum. And she invited me in. She asked if I could come in to feel 4,000-year-old Egyptian statues. And I said, yeah, of course I'd like to come in and feel 4,000-year-old Egyptian statues. So I came in, and it was awesome. It was like going back in time, being able to actually touch the stone and to be able to read the carved hieroglyphs in the Ramses statue. And it was amazing. We were eating lunch afterwards at a sandwich shop, and she asked if I'd like to become an assistant docent and help guide other blind people on these tours. And I said, yeah, that sounds awesome. I just have a question though. What's a docent? I had no idea, but I know now, and it's been a wonderful thing. We've actually gone global in the AP with that. Philadelphia is a great city for accessibility. It's not too big. It's not too small. It's not New York. Yeah, I know. It's just the right size. Transportation, you can get pretty much anywhere in a reasonable amount of time. Transportation can be a little challenging for the blind or the sighted. For walking, one thing I could say for walking, it'd be really neat if we had audible traffic signals. Actually heard one today here close to this building, which is cool. That would be nice. Then for getting around, of course, there are buses and trains. Often it's good to have door-to-door service. There's one option for the blind called paratransit. We have another name for it. We call it parastranded. That's often what ends up happening. There are, of course, cabs, which can have their usual problems. They can be good, but they can have problems too, like dropping you off and abandoning you across the street after you gave them a good tip, you know. There's Uber. Now, this is kind of funny. Uber offers door-to-door service, and they recently discontinued their SMS text message service, which was the most accessible way of doing it. And their app and their website that they force you to use now haven't been accessible. And it's funny, just before I left, literally, as I was going out the door, I got an email, a mass email from them saying their new mobile website just went live. So I haven't gotten a chance to test it for accessibility. I wonder if they got wind that I was going to bring them up at TEDx. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just saying, the email came out right before I left. So I don't know. There was another transportation option in Philly as well called Sidecar. That was ride sharing, but that was too progressive and evolved, and the PPA took it away. And that brings us to the challenges that we have to overcome. I mean, you know, like we have to clean up these regulatory bodies and governments. I mean, for a parking authority to piss off a blind person, I think it's pretty low. Come on. And so, you know, we've got to clean these groups up. Socially, I think, you know, we've got to avoid cliques. We have to remain as open and inclusive as possible. And that also brings up, by the way, another type of accessibility, which is gender equality, all the wonderful efforts getting more women involved in coding and business and things like that in the city. That's also a form of accessibility. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. Absolutely. And of course, like I've been saying, we just need to get these companies to start caring and just start making their stuff accessible. We've got the technology. It's 2014 now. We can start building these awesome interfaces. We just have to start using this technology. I already mentioned transportation. Earlier, I mentioned how easily I could check a stock on my iPhone. We need to get the banks and financial institutions to make the same commitment to accessibility so I can execute a trade with equal ease. There are grocery services now. Some of them are pretty accessible, some of them not accessible at all. And there's also a lot of room for accessibility in household appliances, a lot of room for improvement. Things like washing machines, dishwashers, stoves, things like that. And companies, a lot of them view accessibility as this kind of added feature, this thing that may be nice to have, maybe they'll get around to thinking about implementing it one day. And I asked them though, do you produce something that's an extra thing? These things I just mentioned, you know, transportation, banking, groceries, doing the laundry. These are not extra nice things to have. These are basic amenities that someone needs to have to live independently and with dignity. And that's why it's so important. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the positive thing about this is we have the capability within us now to start making a change. As soon as we leave here today, we can start improving things. If you think about the history of Philadelphia, in some ways we were the birthplace of modern computing. We had ENIAC, which was for a long time the fastest computer. Ben Franklin, the original nerd, now walked down what is Nerd Street, yes. And when William Penn first designed the grid system of the city, he did so to help fight against overcrowding, fire, and disease. So when you think about the history of Philadelphia, we really have accessibility in our DNA. And that's why I feel that Philadelphia could really become known throughout the world for its accessibility. All we have to do is JFDI. Thanks a lot, everyone.
So it hits on a few notes that, you know, after watching that video several times now, that I just kind of wanted to share. He stated that, you know, we need to get on the bandwagon of accessibility. Well, and he also then in the same sentence says, it's 2014. Well, I think we all know that it's definitely not 2014 anymore. It's 2021. And some of the things that he says was, if companies start caring, and I don't think that companies all the time think of it in those terms, like, we don't care about this population, so we're not going to do this. Like, I don't think anybody in their job feels that way regularly, but that's one comment he makes. And really, if you do think about it, it does take a level of care to go, okay, this is something we want to do for our population of people that we serve. And it does take individual employees almost to really push that systemic change that an agency needs to make or think about. And he mentions quite a few things about that. I really do. He's very Philadelphia based, but I really do like some of just the things he conveys to an audience about why accessibility is important. So in lieu of showing you these standards, I'm just going to flick through them fairly quickly. And then we're going to move on to something that's a little bit easier to digest. But I'm going to show you as I move through the next slides. This comes from 508 checklist at healthandhumanservices.gov. And in the PowerPoint, we'll share this out. It links to all of the standards. And standards, if you're not an educator and you're not familiar with like curriculum standards, they can be a beast to read. And it's like reading a textbook, or a better way of putting it, it's like reading the instruction manual for a microwave for fun. And that's not really all that fun. Some people might really enjoy that, but I'm not particularly one of them. And I couldn't imagine many people in this audience are. But some of the best practices that are mentioned, these are the standards, should I say, like, and I'm not going text alternative or no text content. Let me close out this window that's up here at the top. I'm only going to really highlight the tops of them because, again, I skipped this in lieu of showing you actually a blind person's perspective on accessibility. And we're just going to move to actually look at some of these standards a little bit easier. Time-based media is one thing, and anything that's a video is considered time-based media, or audio is considered time-based media. Anything that works on a time, you play it and at times. Adaptable info and relationships, such as like tables and tabs and text boxes. Meaningful sequence, meaning that like, if I'm going to read the top of the page, as humans, we read left to right. Generally, some cultures don't, but in America, generally reading English, we read left to right. Mr. Rogers went left to right because that's the way children learn how to read. So meaningful sequence is that the document matches up with how someone with assistive technology would use it. And again, some of these standards seem a little bit difficult to comprehend. Like, how am I going to do this in my regular job? I will break it down. It's one of those sessions where we deal with the harder stuff first, and we get to a little bit more of the easier things. Sensory characteristics, if a word is in color, or if it tells you to navigate, like those are different things you just need to consider. Distinguishable use of color. I've got a great example about coming in and not calling in. We'll go over that. Audio control. So if there is something that's playing any type of music. Now, you don't see this in Word documents that much anymore. In the 90s, we just thought it was cool to put, clip art and sounds and anything that we could because it was new, but you don't see audio controls much anymore. Contrast is a biggie. There is a color analyzer that we can talk about, not so much maybe in this session, but there is a color analyzer that allows you to kind of take a look and see, is my green font on a bright pink background readable? More than likely it's not. So it's just, if you notice my PowerPoint slides as an example of this, it's really like looking at a blackboard. Now, this doesn't work for every single person out there, but when teaching individuals with visual impairments, generally it does work fairly well. It's just a clean, distraction-free PowerPoint, not really any bells and whistles, but it gets the job done. Keyboard access, somebody needs to be able to navigate through the document with a keyboard. Enough time, and time is adjustable, pause, stop, and hide. So basically, there are some web applications or some things that you can use that you're typing in it, and then you take a sip of your coffee or your Coca-Cola and look back, maybe eat a bite of a sandwich, come back to it, and you're like, oh, it's kicked me out and I've lost everything. That's happened multiple times to me. So, in Word, it's not that big of a deal generally. Seizures, this is a pretty solid thing to consider. And again, we'll go over these standards a little bit easier to digest. But if you've got something flashing, it says 3 flashes or below threshold, which is like 3 times per second. Even if it's something flashing in your document, it's just wise to avoid because it could enable seizures for someone with epilepsy. And that's just something you don't want to send out a happy birthday wish to someone and accidentally give them an epileptic seizure. That's not really the most fun thing to do. Some of the stuff, again, like headings and labels, it's just a way to organize the text that you're presenting. Readable language, making it easier for individuals maybe who might read a different language. I think an example given in the handbook is Korean, or in Alabama, I think really Spanish as a second language is very common. So it's just making sure you set those things properly. Predictable focus, just basically that the page doesn't put a pop-up window in the bottom of the corner of the screen. Input assistance, error identification. Basically, if a page pops up with an error, that it's like in common sense terms to understand. Again, you're not going to see these in Word documents. However, these are the standards for Microsoft Word documents. All of these things are. So that brings me to a friendlier focus here, and that is section 508.gov. And section 508 is a great website. I'm going to stop sharing this PowerPoint and I'm going to pull it up just to show you how handy dandy this website can be. Like, it's a fantastic way to just look through these standards that I'm talking about, from PDF to PowerPoint to Word, spreadsheets, anything. If you have a question about it, it's going to give a nice and easy way to look through some of this stuff. And it's a great resource. So section 508.gov, you're going to go to the home page when you get there. Generally, it's going to look somewhat like this. And up at the top, you've got quite a few things that you could go through and look, training being one of them. But the place I really like to go to is Create. And in Create, you have create accessible digital products, pretty much what we're talking about during this training. So documents, electronic signatures, meetings, PDFs, presentations. I'm going to click on documents just to give you an idea of what this looks like. So if you find me absolutely boring, you cannot pay attention today, and it's after lunch and food's sitting a little bit heavy. If you need someone else to give you a full presentation on this, there is a whole hour-long presentation just on Microsoft Word. And it's divvied up in modules. So maybe you don't need to do them all at once. You could just go through some of the sections, but they're very soothing. I would say the way the narrators come across is very mellow, very dry, but they are great training. So if you need any reiteration of what we're going over today, then you can get that through this website as well. Two of the things that I'm really going to focus on today, one that we're going to look at in heavy detail, that I'm going to take you through how you make a Word document accessible, is this printable accessible testing. So it's just a checklist. However, there's this wonderful document, and I'm going to open it up here in Chrome, but it's also going to take me to Word. So give me a second to switch. But this is something, once we're done today, you can take it and you can go literally step by step through this document. And if you can read and follow instructions, then you can take a document and remediate it, make it accessible. So I'm going to open this up and let me come over to my screen. So I've been accused before, and Anna, we are on AED COP, correct?
We are.
Sweet. So I've been accused of giving my sermon out before I preach. And so this is why I don't send this handbook out, because generally I think most people would be looking at the handbook instead of kind of listening to some of the guidance I'm giving. But this handbook is wonderful. It really is step by step what we're going to go through today. And essentially like document formatting. You start with number 1. and go all the way through it. And it's going to tell you instruction. Look at the file name in Windows Explorer or the bar in MS Word. And it's going to tell you how to change the file name. So it's one of the standards. I mean, and it goes through basically like any handbook that you would see. So I'm just kind of scrolling down to give you an idea. It's got screenshots. It's got bullets and nice suggestions for you if you're questioning anything or how to do any of this stuff. It goes basically through all of it in very, very easy detail. Again, it's free, it's printable. These are the guides that I really suggest that when you're done today, go check out section 508.gov and take a look, print one, keep it. If you are one of those individuals in your agency that does do heavy document creation, this is something to keep in mind. Now, it does look like a lot of work at first. It looks that way, but really, once you've done this once, twice, even 3 times, a lady, you start to understand really how this stuff is done. Like a lot of the things you can just look at and go, nope, that's fine, move on. Nope, that's fine, move on. And so you probably are doing some best practices now without even knowing it, but probably not all of them. So once you go through it, it's fairly easy just to kind of remember what you need to do to make a document accessible. So I'm going to switch over to our checklist, and I really enjoy using, here we are, really enjoy using these checklists because the manual you just saw, I've got one for spreadsheets. I say section 508.gov has them. For checklists, I mean, for spreadsheets, for PowerPoints, for PDFs, the format is all the same. They have a handbook for everything. You just have to be willing to go through it. What I like about this checklist, though, is it basically rips out all those headings and it gives you direct instruction, like what actually needs to be done to make this document accessible. So, for instance, here, heading 1, the Word document .dox is saved with a descriptive file name. So for instance, now it's a little tough to see what I'm doing on a computer through Zoom. We found that out in the last training. So I do apologize if you're kind of squinting and going, what's he typing right there? Just know that the manuals that I showed you before are going to give you step-by-step guidance to do this, but I do like going through it with you. So the Word document is saved with a descriptive file name. Well, in particular, this document is MS Word 2016 Printable Accessibility Checklist. That's a pretty descriptive file name. You wouldn't want just something like report 2020. What kind of report? Book report, annual report, financial report. What kind of report? So when I say some of these standards help not only individuals with disabilities, they help you too. Or digital organization is very important. And if you're not naming stuff correctly, then I mean, and I'm sure we've all been victim to, what did I call that file? And you're looking on your computer for 30, 40 minutes for a file that you should have actually known. File identifies the document and its purpose, kind of the same idea here. The document uses MS Word heading styles. Now, headings are kind of cool. And I find that a lot of people, even that have been trained on accessibility, they don't look at headings. And before I continue on too, as I go through these, like for instance, I just checked to make sure the file name of the document was correct. If I'm putting this out publicly and I'm the person responsible, I will make sure that if I've got a big document, that I will print this checklist along with that document. And I'll initial every area that I check as I go down through it. So it's kind of a way that if there's ever a question that comes up where somebody goes, it's not accessible, I can't tell what's going on. You can, and I do apologize, I've got a very loud lawnmower nearby because it's only appropriate that it would happen during this time. But as I'm going through it, I sign and initial everything just to be my checklist to know that I went through it and I got it all going. So let's take a look at headings. And when I talk about Word documents, the same file and the same checklist essentially can apply to PDFs or emails, excuse me. The same checklist can work generally for PowerPoint. You'll see that. So if you get a grasp of what these concepts are now, you'll see I'm kind of repeating myself as we go to Outlook or we go to PowerPoint. It is essentially the same idea. So I'm going to take a look at Microsoft Word headings. So let me switch over to my actual Word document. Before I go through, are there any questions in the chat? I see 6 chat bubbles. So Stephanie or Anna?
None at this moment.
None at this time? All right.
I will say though, we haven't been seeing the checklist. We've only seen the Word document on how to author for accessibility.
Hang on. That's a good one to let me know, Stephanie. Thank you. Let me see. Because Word isn't as cool. Now you've got my checklist, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so sorry about that. Let's take a look again. This is what I'm talking about with the checklist. This is what I initial. Is the file name for the document .dox format? Initial, yes. File name identifies the document type or purpose. Initial, yes. And essentially this is, and I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom because it's only about 2 pages or 3 pages total. That goes through the standard. So like 17 things to check for and a document is done. There's notes at the bottom. If you want to just say, hey, there's an issue here and here. We ran into, we couldn't quite make it accessible. So it's just a really great document to say that you audited it yourself. And again, I say like, as you get more accustomed to making documents accessible, it's some of the stuff is really easy just to go through, check, and make sure that it's done. So let me continue on and move. We were at number 2 here. The document uses MS Word heading styles. So headings are pretty awesome. If you're a blind or visually impaired person, it helps you navigate through, it helps you essentially navigate through a document with ease. Like it doesn't take very much to go through the document. Give me a second. Got to open this up. And that is the one goofy part about Zoom is it's a little bit tricky to navigate through all of my windows. So I have basically a document that is a series of dad jokes because I thought I would try to make it a little bit more palatable, a little easier read, but like which bear is the most condescending? A panda. So yeah, best dad jokes. If you can't tell, I am a dad. But when we're talking about headings in a document, you might have best dad jokes and on the next line or the next page per se, you might have worst dad jokes here. So that would be like a second heading, but it could be in terms of an agenda. You've got Monday morning, Tuesday morning, and things that are listed underneath it. It could be really anything that you're creating that has a heading and a subheading. So a title, our agenda today that we sent out, office accessibility. You could have underneath it Word, PowerPoint, something else. This is the way that it's the best way to organize things. So I would highlight it. And basically, if it's anything other than a title, it's heading level 1. Now, and I picked 4, so excuse me, I'm going to pick heading level 1. Now that's going to make it blue. So a lot of people are turned off by that. They go, oh, I don't want my document to be blue, or I don't want my font to be smaller. So what I did there was basically take a piece of my Word document and put HTML code into it. Now it does change the style automatically, and if you don't like that, and that's heading level 1, excuse me, I can say, all right, I don't want it to be that large. I don't want it to be bold. So I can come through and just shrink it back down if I want to. I can unbold it, but the heading still stays there. If you've got a document that's maybe 120 pages or something like that, that doesn't include headings, you're doing it wrong. You can take these headings at the end of the day, and I'll show you just very quickly. So say this is another heading level 1, worst dad jokes. And I'm going to keep the formatting because it just looks a little bit easier. And I'm just pasting in just example headings all through it. Sad dad jokes. And again, I would highlight it. I would come up to my styles up at the top and make sure that I have this done. And I'm just for giggles, I'm only going to do one last page here. Angry dad jokes, and I'm putting heading level 1. Now, if per se funny dad jokes was under this, it makes sense to go, all right, the big title is heading level 1, heading level 2 would come underneath it. So that might be a second heading level, funny dad jokes. And just to give a further example, extra funny. And so I'd highlight it, and maybe this is a heading level 3. Generally, you don't get much further than 3, even though there are options for other stuff. So it shows all this, but if I wanted to at the top, if I've got a big document that's more than just dad jokes, and I wanted to insert a table of contents, there's an easy way to do this with any Microsoft Word product that you're working with. And I say any product, anything in their Office suite, like Office or Word, PDF, Outlook. You've got this beautiful bar up top that probably not a lot of people use. And it's a search bar, but it used to be called the Tell Me bar. And I like the name Tell Me a little bit, you know. So if I'm looking through this checklist and I don't know where to find something, I can always go up to the search bar and go, okay, I want to put in a table of contents. And I just type table, and there it is. I'm just going to pick formatting. So this table of contents, right? Like it took all of my headings that I just put in and split them. If I did this beforehand without doing any of the headings, and some of those, because I copied this off the internet, bad dad jokes, corny dad jokes, hilarious bad dad jokes. Some of them already had this built in, but generally, if you're making this and you highlight the headings into it, you can make a quick and easy table of contents where some of them are also interactive, where if I hit Control and click, if I hit Control and click, it'll take me right to it. That helps a person with accessibility, so they're not having to navigate through the whole file. If I wanted bad dad jokes, it gets me right there. So you can imagine how if you're making a company directory, or if you have a giant annual report, an accessible table of comments or contents does an excellent job of getting you to where you need to be. So I'm going to go back to our standards, but that's just headings. I mean, and it really does make sense when you look at the table of contents. Makes it look like it makes it more manageable when you're looking at the way it is organized. But that's one reason why I love headings, is honestly for that table of contents. A blind person could navigate through this document using just the letter H in their screen reader, and they would just hit bad or best dad jokes, and they'd skip to worst dad jokes instead of having to go through every line. So let me find my checklist and share it with you. So headings in the navigation page match the document's visual outline. Essentially what they mean there is that you wouldn't have, and I'll go back and forgive me because it is going to be flicking back and forth, but you wouldn't have an instance where extra funny dad jokes here visually is there, but it'd be a heading level 1. Or where best dad jokes up at the top would be a heading level 3. Because visually it does not match. So that's essentially what they're mentioning with that standard. So going back to our checklist, lists are formatted correctly. I like this one because it's this list and columns. Let's just focus on these two. Are formatted correctly. You're doing this right already. I can almost bet you money. But some folks still kind of like the old-fashioned way of doing things. So say if you're making a list, generally, you're going to make a list where you do 1 space. And this little auto character recognizer comes up and says, hey, I can tell, bro, you're making a list. Let's see what you do when you hit number 2. This is the proper way to make a list. Where Word is automatically generating these little characters off to the side. For instance, if I take that out and I go up to bullets and numbering, bullets. If I'm making a list and I hit enter, the next list is going to be a bulleted list as well. That seems almost redundant to say. A lot of people might make bulleted lists, and it's almost hard for me to do it the wrong way, but I've seen it done still, and I don't know why. But somebody will copy this little dot, and then they'll just post it like a period, and then they'll hit space or something like that. But it's almost hard to not do that standard anymore because Word just goes, oh, you're making a list. You're making a list. Every now and then someone will do it. So if you're making bulleted list using bullets and numbering or the automatic function in Word, you're doing it right. So also, and I'm going to take this top part here, it mentioned columns. Sometimes, and sometimes, I say this, somebody's not real familiar with Word, and they'll make a column like this. They'll add in, and it almost won't let me do it as much anymore. They'll move something and move things underneath in their own columns. It's easier if I type a short list to kind of show you the best example, just some short words. So types of pizza. Somebody might put cheese, and then they hit tab a few times, bacon, olives, tab, 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 ham. I actually ate lunch today. The last time I did this training, I skipped lunch and I was just on point with my pizza toppings, and today I'm not. Bell pepper. So what I'm showing you here is the wrong way to make a list. People still do that today, and it's a little bit tough when they're actually doing this. It's more work to make a list incorrectly, I think, than doing it right now. So like if I was to look at the punctuation and spelling in this, you can see I tabbed like 5 times through this and I hit enter. The list visually, it looks okay, I guess, but it's not really the right way to make columns. So I'm going to delete some of this coming through. You want to use the functions in Word. So, and the reason why you want to use the functions in Word is so that people using a different assistive technologies like won't misread it. So if I wanted to make this into 2 columns, I highlight everything that I've just listed out, and I could find my columns button up here. I don't remember where it is. Let's type in my handy search engine, add or remove columns. I'm going to do 2 columns. So it looks the same, but when I look at the when I look at the paragraph feature, it shows that there is no tabbing in between because a screen reader will read that empty space as blank. And the person might think, well, hey, I'm at the end of my document. So what this really does is doesn't allow spacing in between the document. It looks the same, but it's not. So if you're using the functions built into the to Microsoft Word, you're doing it right. So for a lot of people, this is pretty easy because they are already doing it. Let's go back to our list. Any questions at this point? I know that this is where some stuff gets a little more technical, a little more into the weeds.
There's no questions in the chat that I see yet. Jason, if y'all have any questions, y'all feel free to direct message us if you don't want to put them in the general chat, Anna Taylor or Stephanie Johnston, so we can make sure we get all your questions answered.
Yeah, that is fine. I really hate, I love doing this live because people are they're more inclined to talk to you when they see you there working on stuff or they're doing it with you. So here's another one that number 5 is like layouts of tables have correct format. So in the same vein, and it's really strange, but you'll see this, that people will draw a table and it's bad for me because I almost don't know how to do it the wrong way anymore, but they will put a picture of a table in a Word document and that doesn't work. But if you needed to make a table, add table, I just typed in the word table up there and then follow the steps needed right here to add in however many cells that you need to do. And that's creating basically an accessible table. If you're following these guidelines, it works just fine, just essentially adding it in. So like someone with a screen reader would be able to know they could navigate this table, and I'm using the tab button, just using tab, and I do apologize. I've got a little bit of background noise going on, but I can navigate through tab and it just makes the table essentially readable. And again, sometimes people will take a picture of a document and put it in here, and that is the absolute worst practice because it's not readable. Okay, so moving on to the next section, going through, a lot of this is fairly simple if you're using the features already built into Word. Intended languages are correctly formatted in the document. So meaning that and it's better to go through the Word checklist or the format checklist if you have this under consideration. The majority of documents we do really don't have this that intends or that kind of comes up very often. But if you have Spanish, make sure that it's formatted properly. If you have Korean, make sure that it is formatted properly. And that's through language and settings through Microsoft Word. Links are descriptive. So this is a big no-no that I see all the time. I see it less so in Word documents, but all the time in email. And it's kind of frustrating, honestly. I see it in bigger name companies that really shouldn't be doing it. Not just like those of us in Alabama state government, but bigger companies will do this fairly often as well. So let me just come through, but links need to be descriptive and links need to be unique. So, and I use this example of Pizza Hut. Okay, let me run and grab a link real quick off of the website. So there is a way of adding in links to where you could essentially, instead of having the word Pizza Hut here. I hit Control K, and I'm a keyboard user. Like I really do like using keyboard commands, or I could right click on it and click link if my computer wants to act correctly. So, and then I would paste the link for Pizza Hut. Now, that's a fairly accurate link, right? Like you can tell that's Pizza Hut. Sometimes what will happen, let's see, is someone will post this in the bottom of it. So this link, if you could imagine reading every single, and that's the Google search for Pizza Hut. If you could imagine this, it's a screen reader would read every single character built into this, like www.google.com/search, Q equals Pizza Hut, and all of this other extra stuff. So instead of doing that, it would be worth it to change this, copy it, and post it into its own unique link. Now, at times, probably what you're used to seeing is if you want to register for this conference, click here. And then you will see this. And I'm just going to send it to Pizza Hut, but if you want to register for this conference, click here. If you want to see hotel information, click here. And then somebody will post the link there. So these two links, one will tell you to register for the conference, and the other will tell you to what hotel and lodging information. But to a person who uses a screen reader, this is not unique and it's not descriptive. All it says to me is here. Usually a person using a screen reader will pull this up and it'll say links list. And then it'll have them numbered like 1 here, 2 here. And so really they wouldn't know which link does what. So instead you would call this, if you would like to register for the conference, follow our and you would highlight all of this. So follow our conference registration link. And kind of even what I said here is a little redundant. It's like to register, follow our conference registration link. And so in the menu that they would pull up, it would read specifically okay. So it's just a nice, concise way to do it. Like it is almost a glaring error when I see emails that have click here come across, because it is poor accessibility and it is a red flag to a lot of folks. Like even people that aren't using assistive technology but have had training like this, they look at it at your agency as bad practice, no doubt. Following through with going back to our checklist. Vital information in headers and footers and watermarks is duplicated in text. This is something that's actually not very common that I see used very often. Like it's overlooked, should I say. So like if we came up to our sample document here, and I'm making sure that I am sharing my sample document. We come up to the top. Say this was top secret or so you could have something up in the top of a document that says confidential, do not distribute. You may have an instance where someone with a screen reader cannot see that. doesn't read the top of the page. So what you would need to do is a simple fix. And I'm going to delete our table of contents right now, just for ease of use. So what you would do, usually I see an asterisk at the top, and it can be smaller font, that's fine, but it repeats. And that could be made smaller. And essentially you might want that running on every page, and then you would have to repeat it on every page. So it's almost easier not to do it in terms of the heading. It's just so those individuals, because and there have been instances of employees sharing information that had this glaringly written at the top, but their assistive technology didn't read it and they shared it out. But it's a pretty easy standard to follow. Going back to our checklist, data tables are created using built-in features. We talked about that. Images and other objects have alternative text. Now, I gotta say, a lot of people are very comfortable with this feature. More often than not, the one accessibility feature I see people looking at is this. So when we talk about alternative text, I give a joke that's given by my consumers a lot. You know, to a person with sight, a picture's worth 1,000 words. To a person who's visually impaired, a picture's only worth one, blank, 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 because that's all a screen reader will read is the word blank. So I'm going to take a different picture because I've read the panda joke. What's the most detail-oriented ocean? The Pacific. So I would right-click any image that's in it and go to Edit Alt Text. And then I would come in and go, basically describe what's here, the most detail ocean. The Pacific. So if it was a decorative object, meaning it was just like flowers or a line in the back, you can mark it as decorative. Generally, you could say image of ocean with title words. This, you don't want to be too verbose where you're just explaining everything under the sun. If the image is like more than a couple of lines, then it needs to be given a descriptor at the bottom. Like the image needs to have a brief description, but if it's this long figure or document that you're going through, then you do need to have some type of image description and blah, blah, blah. Like it's going to just describe what the image is. And you see that in textbooks, like science textbooks or history textbooks all the time. Figure 1.1 is a picture of words over ocean. You know, it's a very common practice to see. So using alt text is fantastic. Another thing that you want to make sure that you do is make sure that the text is in line. So the option of wrapping text, you could put text, you want every image to be in line with text. And a lot of people will create a document and won't do this, or they make it look neat. So I'll give you an example of how it can visually look different. So we're shrinking this down. And if I wrap text, I'll put it as tight. Maybe that will give me, that did give me what I wanted it to do. So people making like newsletters and magazine articles and stuff, they'll do this because it looks nice and pretty, but the screen reader doesn't know which way to read. Like it'll read this picture first and it'll have problems where it won't read this other text that's at the side over here. It won't read that effectively. So you always want to make sure the images are in line with text, and there is an option for that as well. So we're going through the checklist. And it does say this. I mean, literally the next one, text boxes do not have objects not in line warnings. Images, objects, and text boxes are in line with text. So basically, you just need to make sure you do what I just said. Another common thing that comes up is number 12, color and other visual characteristics are also visually described. So this is one I don't see very often either. And some people will start doing it and then they don't continue it. Like it's not a best practice in the agency per se. Like they'll feel good about themselves for a while and then go, well, nobody uses this. It's good to really get in good practice with this. So here's a sentence. If you are late and do not call, you will be fired. So sometimes you'll see this as like staff motivation posters, or it might be an important email with a boss that's a little font happy. So if you are late is in yellow, and that's not a very good contrast, and you do not call is in orange, you will be fired is in red. So that clearly puts some significance on these words. If you are late, late being significant, and do not call, call being significant, you will be fired, very significant. So if somebody used this as an example, the way you would make it accessible is you wouldn't do it in, you would want to change your font back to black. Or just in, so if you're late, yellow, and you do not call, you will be fired, red. Okay. And then generally you would keep this black just in case you have someone who has color blindness or a visual issue in that sense. But it allows someone to know, well, this is selected. I've seen this done as well, and it's a rather frequent one. Register for the conference by tomorrow's deadline. And what they'll do is they'll highlight it. Well, highlighting doesn't make a hill of beans to somebody who's using a screen reader. So you would actually, if it's a big block of content, we put and then end highlight. That happens a lot. And it's fairly significant if you are putting in important information. All right, skipping ahead here because I've got very limited amount of time left and a lot left to cover with you guys. So anything that I'm showing you in Microsoft Word can be applied to definitely Microsoft Outlook. So email and Word look essentially the same thing, or they're essentially the same program. It's just you're emailing. So, but when you're editing in an email form, it is just like Word. Embedded files are accessible, meaning that if you have anything inserted into the file itself, it must be accessible. So if you put a video in it, if you put an audio transcript in it, or an audio only content, you need to provide transcripts for that. Synchronized media has accurate, incomplete synchronized captions. So essentially, if you're embedding any type of file or document into the Word file, it must be accessible in order for the file to be accessible. That kind of makes sense, but some folks kind of miss that mark too. You don't want, like if it's a portfolio or you're linking to another Word document, in order for the document to be accessible that you're writing, the one you're also putting a link in for must be accessible. So it's like you can't reference a document that's inaccessible and expect your document to be considered accessible. The document has no forms. I see this a lot. A lot of times people will create like registration forms in Word. That's just a little outdated and goofy. Now you should be using PDF. You can create the registration form in Word, but make it fillable in PDF. So it's just a little backwards to be, somebody sends you a conference registration and it's in Word. Like that's just a bit goofy. So just make sure that it has no forms. Flashing objects, we mentioned that, like if it's flashing 3 times or more, really just avoid them at all cost. An alternate accessible version is provided. So say you go through this and you've got a difficult document that doesn't allow you to do alt text images, or your document cannot possibly be changed to that. You do want to do your best to make sure that that document will work. But if all else fails, you can create another version. I'll give you an example. At times, our agency and other state agencies will make these really beautiful, elaborate PDFs. And just the art style and the way they're created, they cannot be made accessible. So providing a plain text document with that word included is the right way to go sometimes. Like if it cannot be done, that's a 2-door solution. You don't want to do that if at all possible, but you want to make the original document accessible. But we are realistic and go, hey, sometimes it doesn't work. So make sure the alternate version, that you have an alternate version, and that if your current version has been updated in 2021, your alternate version needs to be updated to 2021 as well, not say 2015's version. And that's roughly it for Word documents. And again, the same concepts. I'm going to share Outlook just real quick to give you an idea. I'm sure a lot of you have used Outlook for some of these features, but Outlook the same way. You just want to make sure that your emails, if you're sending an agenda, Monday, class 1, class 2, Tuesday, you want to make sure that you are using appropriate headings, even with this. So the way you do that in Outlook, click styles. Styles, this would be our title sequence. Or title. And again, if you don't like the font it's in or how big it is, you can adjust it and keep it, but you do want it to say title if you've got that, and then emphasize heading level 1, heading level 2. So, and then everything else essentially that we've talked about in Word does work that way. So skipping over to PowerPoint, because PowerPoint's a tad bit different. We've got a blank presentation pulled up. And I thought I had a blank presentation pulled up. Oh, hang on. Here we go. So when you generally make a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm just adding in a few more slides, you get these bars and boxes that are automatically added in. Now I'm victim of this. I'll just take them out and delete them and do my own thing in PowerPoint. But that's really not good practice for accessibility. Like it doesn't make it easy to use. And if you're going back through the PDF or through the PowerPoints, it makes it quite difficult to remediate if you're doing that. Every slide should have a title, even if it's not displayed. So here's one of the best ways to think about PowerPoints. And again, I like to go to design, and I personally use this black outline, black and white outline when I'm working with some people. There is an option when you go to print it off to have it go back to black and white, because this will use up all your ink cartridges if you try to print them black and white or with a black background. Again, I'm making sure my time here. The best way for me to tell you to work with PowerPoint is follow through the actual checklist going in the handbook from section 508.gov. But the accessibility checker built into PowerPoint is wonderful. Like it will do what you need to have done in addition to PowerPoint. if you're considering all of the things we went through with Microsoft Word, the colors, headings you don't use so much in PowerPoint. It doesn't really work that way. But if you're keeping your alt text on all of your images, a descriptive title in the file name, if you're doing all of those best practices, then generally the accessibility checker will make sure you're compliant. And I'll show you in the PowerPoints that I have created right now, there's probably quite a few accessibility issues because I haven't proofed it ready to go out. I'm going to share this as well, just my actual PowerPoint. And so I go to search an accessibility checker. And so missing slide title. One of my slides is missing a slide title. Let's see which one it is. I guess that's one towards the end. Yeah, that was just an extra slide title. So that's okay. And I'm looking through the navigation bar where it's describing all of my slides and titles. People with assistive technology navigate almost by this way over on the side. And this is what really reads in the screen reader. So if there's nothing there, then it's hard for them to understand what a title is. Duplicate slides are one thing that kind of comes up fairly often. Office accessibility. I think that's because it's the same title as my original first page. So you might want to change the wording of that, because if you notice the very top, it's also titled Office Accessibility. So these are just features that you can go through. It's a very guided tour with PowerPoint, and I love that. Like, also built into Word and kind of every other document, Word, Excel, Outlook has it as well for email. But you can take a look to help you along this journey, the accessibility checker. Now, it's not the be all end all. It won't notice a lot of things that are written in the checklist, but it is a great place to start. So I know that's a lot of information. I want to kind of stop here and take a breath and let you guys go, okay, now that you've seen a bevy of information, we have some time for just a few questions.
Great job, Jason. Let's see what we got here in chat.
Thanks, Anna.
Okay, we've got a question here. Will a sighted person see the text in the parentheses, the yellow or begin highlight?
Yes, because again, it's not necessarily just for blind individuals. It is for people with maybe anachromatia, like where they don't have color in their eyes. Like they could be a person that drives, that walks in, you don't even notice that they have a visual impairment, but they can't see colors properly. So yeah, that would be written plain out there.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Do you guys have any additional questions for Jason?
And if I don't, I just want to echo out that it's a lot of information. I really do get that. And it seems overwhelming, but it's honestly, it's not. And if your agency starts implementing this for documents that go public, you're going to become more affiliated with making documents the right way. Like, do you necessarily need to highlight that text? If you don't like orange or red or yellow beside it, well, is there a different way you can do it? And
You have one more question.
Sure.
How do you pull up the link box? You can go back over that.
The link box, like the sure.
The web links.
To insert a web link. So I will go, heck, I'll just go to the end of this document and type in something here. So ADRS. If I wanted to add in a link, I would highlight it and I would right click it and I would go to link. Now, personally, I like the Command Control K because it's going to pop up. It's going to pop up right here, and I go down to this address portion and I insert whatever address I've got there. And in this case, it would be www.rehab.com. wcag.alabama.gov. And so I'd hit enter, and then when I clicked on it, it would take me directly to the ADRS website. So it's just a clean, nice, neat way to look at those links. That's a good question, though. Anything else before I close?
Very good, Jason. Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all, let's give Jason some love. I mean, I don't know about you, but I learn so much every time he presents. So shout out to Jason Martin, and y'all don't try to steal him from us now, okay? So, because we need him over here at ADRS, and we really, really value all of the knowledge that he brings to the table. And we are just, we are so glad to have him as part of our team here. So, so with that, Jason, you want to stop sharing? We can wave bye to everybody.
Yeah.
Thank them.
I'll stop sharing. And as always, now Anna's right. Y'all can't steal me from my home, but if you do have any questions, my email is jason.martin@rehab.alabama.gov. And feel free, if you've got any questions, send them my way.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to thank you all. Give us a wave bye. We appreciate it. We really enjoyed spending time with y'all today. I know it was a really long day, and like Jason mentioned in the beginning, how do you eat an elephant? You know, one bite at a time. And so we have lots of elephant to eat there, but it was just a lot of great content. I'm really grateful for Lillian that had you guys in mind when she was trying to raise the bar from a state agency perspective. And so we're just grateful for her for having the vision to get you guys trained on some of the basic stuff and then some of the heavier stuff too. And we look forward to seeing some of you back on Thursday, those of you that are going to deeper dive with us on Thursday. So thank you very much for giving us the opportunity. And again, remember our map, reach out to your local BRC. They are the subject matter expert in your area. I'm Anna Taylor. Y'all can contact me anytime if y'all are wanting additional training or something like that. We can put something special together for you. And Matt Morse, thank you so much for helping us with all the technical stuff. And we just really appreciate everything you guys did for us today. So thank you very much. And with that, we will call it a day, guys. Thank you so much for everything. And we appreciate you. And thank you very much. Come see us over at ADRS. If you know someone with a disability, call us. If you need help with recruiting people, call us. We've got a great pipeline for you. So thank you. And inclusion works.